Hey guys, tonight we drift together into a world that is at once historical and mythical, a place where the air tastes of wet stone, pine resin, and wood smoke, and where stories hum louder than the cicadas. You're not watching some fast-paced action series. You're lying there, feeling your eyelids heavier with each passing moment. And yet, the tale I'm about to spin comes with enough magic and just enough boredom to lull you into sleep while still keeping your imagination tickled. You're about to enter the misty mountains of ancient Vietnam, where the legend of the dragon and fairy children first took root. You probably won't survive this if you try to fact-check every tiny detail. Half of it is myth, half of it is archaeology, and a solid quarter is me poking fun at how humans have always loved a good bedtime exaggeration. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments, because it's always fun knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fog curls around your ankles as you trudge up a narrow path, stones slick with moss. The mountain breathes a kind of damp, eternal patience, as if it has seen so many generations stumble across its slopes that your footsteps barely register. You hear water trickling, hidden springs that once fed rice paddies below. This is the northern Vietnamese highland, the cradle of the dragon and fairy legend, a place where myth was not just a story, but the software that ran entire communities. Imagine living in an age before Google Maps, before even maps at all, when to explain why you lived between mountains and seas. You told each other that your ancestors were literally born from both. Historians still argue whether the earliest layers of this legend are pure invention or faintly rooted in tribal memories of migration. Some say it's a coded way of describing ancient seafaring clans merging with upland farming peoples. Others shrug and say, maybe people just liked the idea of a dragon marrying a fairy. Both explanations work fine when you're sleep drifting. You feel the cool wind brush your cheek, carrying hints of wood smoke from villages that dotted the hills thousands of years ago. Archaeologists believe people in this region as early as 3000 BCE were already domesticating rice in terraced paddies, guiding water with bamboo pipes. It's a small historical anchor amid the foggy legend. And, to be fair, that fact alone is oddly comforting. Rice, that plain bowl on your table, has been someone's midnight snack for nearly 5,000 years. Talk about a timeless comfort food. As you keep walking, you pass carved stones, some with spiral markings. These are not real, but you imagine them anyway, because spirals always show up when ancient people try to capture the sense of eternity. And deep inside, you chuckle at the thought. If cavemen had access to Instagram filters, spirals would have been trending non-stop. Somewhere in this mist, the stage is set for Lac Long Quan, the dragon king of the sea, and O Ko, the mountain fairy. But before they arrive, the mountains themselves deserve attention. They are old volcanic bones, softened by rain and jungle. You can almost hear them muttering, "Here we go again, another human telling our story." That self-awareness is what keeps you relaxed. Even the land doesn't take itself too seriously. You pause near a stream, dipping your hand into the icy water. The locals in antiquity may have seen rivers as living spirits, guardians of boundaries. One quirky tidbit. In some early cultures of Southeast Asia, people believed rivers were literal roads for souls, leading them to afterworld villages. So every time you stare into a flowing brook, you might just be looking at rush hour traffic for ghosts. That's both unsettling and oddly cute. Imagine tiny ghost scooters zipping downstream. The mist parts, and you glimpse a valley below, dotted with rice terraces that look like green stairways climbing toward the heavens. Those terraces, according to historians, required immense cooperation. Villagers had to work in sync, measuring out irrigation channels with bare feet and bamboo sticks. And yet, wrapped in the legend, such feats of engineering were explained not by communal labor, but by the blessings of divine ancestry. It's easier, after all, to say, we build because we are dragon fairy children, rather than, we held 12 exhausting committee meetings about mud distribution. As you descend a slope, the scent of damp earth swells. You picture ancient villagers crouching in stilt houses, woven bamboo walls rattling with the monsoon. Smoke curls through roof gaps, carrying the smell of fish sauce and boiled roots. These sensory echoes blur with the myth, reminding you that every grand legend once had muddy feet. Someone once had to wash dishes while listening to tales of divine marriages. Historians still argue whether the legend was consciously political, crafted to unify tribes, or whether it just evolved as bedtime storytelling that gradually hardened into origin myth. Either way, the mountains don't care. They stand, green and dripping, regardless of human debates. Now, the trail steepens, and you can almost hear drums in the distance. Not war drums yet, but ceremonial beats, echoes of bronze gongs that once signaled planting seasons. That's a real historical fact. The Jungan culture, known for its spectacular bronze drums, flourished here around 600 BCE. Those drums weren't just percussion. They were loudspeakers of the ancient world, thundering across valleys. Imagine being half asleep in your hut and suddenly boom. Attention villagers, it's rice planting o'clock. Better than a smartphone alarm, and with fewer snooze options. As you sway on the trail, lulled by this imaginary beat, the myth starts to shimmer through the mist. You haven't yet met the dragon king or the fairy princess, but the land feels ready for them. Their love story won't drop out of nowhere. It will be stitched into this tapestry of terraces, rivers, and smoky huts. You breathe slower, the world fuzzes softer, and the highlands wrap you in their sleepy patience. The mist thickens, but instead of getting lost, you follow a ripple in the air, a shimmer like sunlight dancing on water, even though the sky is dull and gray. That is the first sign of him, Lac Long Quan, the enigmatic dragon king. He isn't the kind of dragon who hoards treasure in caves or scorches nights with bad dragon breath. No, his domain is the sea, rolling, endless, and moody, like a god who can't decide if he's having a good day or summoning a typhoon. You feel the pull toward the coast, even though you're still in the highlands, because his presence blurs distance. It's as though, when you think of him, the salty tang of ocean air seeps into your lungs. He rises in your mind's eye, not as a lizard with wings, but as a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a gaze that makes waves hesitate. His veins hum with dragon fire, but he wears human form to wander among mortals. That duality matters. He is of the sea, yet part of the land, a mythic embodiment of Vietnam's geography itself. Historians still argue whether the figure of Lac Long Quan is purely mythical or a symbolic memory of early leaders who came from seafaring clans. Maybe he was a real chieftain whose deeds became embroidered until he shimmered into a dragon king. Or maybe he's just what happens when a fishing village storyteller says, "Our ancestor? Oh, he was married to a fairy. No big deal." You feel yourself walking beside him along a beach that seems eternal. The sand is damp and squeaks underfoot. Sea foam kisses your toes, then retreats shyly. The water glitters, but beneath the surface, you sense scales flashing, coils curling, the dragon form that slumbers inside him. That's the quirky part. In many retellings, he doesn't just shapeshift once. He oscillates, dragon in the sea, man on the land, as casually as you might switch between pajamas and sweatpants. If shapeshifting were an Olympic sport, he'd medal every time. He is not only a figure of awe, but also of protection. Stories say he taught people to farm, to fish, to navigate. He slayed monsters, banished invaders, and defended villagers against forces that crept in from both jungle and wave. In some versions, he even eliminated creatures that sound suspiciously like crocodiles, giant reptiles that terrorized rivers. One tale has him killing New Tin, a massive sea monster so large it devoured entire boats. Picture a prehistoric shark with anger issues, and you're close enough. And here's a fun tidbit. Some early cultures used crocodile dung as sunscreen, so maybe the villagers didn't mind losing a few reptiles. As you listen to his legend, you notice that people never described him as distant. Unlike gods who live on mountaintops sipping ambrosia, Lac Long Quan walked among villagers. They could call out his name for help. He was the archetype of the accessible protector, like that neighbor who always has duct tape and jumper cables. Except his duct tape was the ability to summon tidal waves. Your feet squelch into wet sand as you follow him toward a rocky promontory. The horizon stretches so far you feel small, and that's the point. For people thousands of years ago, the sea was endless mystery. To personify it as a dragon king was less about scientific explanation and more about reassurance. You're not alone, facing the ocean. It has a fatherly figure watching over you. And honestly, isn't that what myths are for? Comfort in the face of overwhelming scale. Historians still argue whether the dragon in Vietnamese lore was borrowed from Chinese traditions, or whether it sprouted independently from local animist beliefs. Dragons in East Asia are often tied to rain and fertility. In Vietnam, Lac Long Quan is not just weather control, he's ancestry itself. The overlap suggests cultural blending, yet the differences insist on uniqueness. It's one of those debates where scholars wave their hands dramatically and then publish articles with very polite footnotes. The waves crash louder and the salt stings your lips. Lac Long Quan stands unbothered, cloak billowing though there's barely any wind. You get the sense he knows things you don't. Tidal calendars, secret caves, histories written in shells. His authority doesn't come from brute force alone, but from knowledge. Ancient people believed the sea held countless treasures and perils, from pearls to whirlpools. To master both required wisdom. He turns slightly, and you catch a flicker of scales glistening along his arm. He doesn't hide his duality, he embodies it, and you realize this is foreshadowing. He will fall in love with someone who also embodies two worlds, someone whose essence is just as contradictory as his. But we're not rushing there yet. For now, you walk with him, feeling the spray on your face. A quirky thought crosses your mind. If Lac Long Quan had a modern-day profile, it would probably say, occupation, sea king, hobbies, slaying monsters, teaching agriculture, occasional shape-shifting, looking for someone magical, must enjoy long walks by the beach. That kind of dating profile would definitely get attention. The villagers of the time, living in bamboo stilt houses, must have whispered stories of his visits. Imagine them crouching by smoky hearths, wide-eyed children listening as elders described the Dragon King descending from the waves to rescue them. It must have felt as real to them as the fish drying on racks outside. One historical anchor. Coastal settlements in early Vietnam were deeply tied to maritime trade. Archaeological finds of shells, pottery, and bronze tools suggest people were already part of larger exchange networks. So maybe the myth of a sea dragon ancestor reflected the very real importance of water routes. Just as a community that thrives on rice would tell stories about rice spirits, a people who thrived on the sea told stories of a sea king father. The tide rolls in, frothing white. You realize that every crash against the rocks sounds a little like applause, as if the ocean itself approves of this legend. Your breath slows. The rhythm of waves matches the rhythm of your heart. Lac Long Quan walks ahead, fading slightly into mist, but you don't feel abandoned. He is part of the landscape now, woven into the tide, the sand, the very salt clinging to your skin. And though you know his story will soon intertwine with the mountain fairy, for now, you let the sea lull you, rocking gently between history and myth, between fact and imagination. The sea wind fades behind you, and now you find yourself surrounded by whispering trees, their branches curling like long green arms, the air heavy with resin and the earthy perfume of moss. A hush settles over the forest as though the land itself waits for someone extraordinary. And into this hush she steps, Oko, the fairy princess. You don't stumble upon her with a trumpet fanfare. No, it's quieter than that. She arrives like morning mist sliding over mountain ridges, her presence so natural, you almost think she's always been here, hiding behind every leaf. Oko is no ordinary figure from folklore. She is described as a celestial maiden, a being who came down from the upper realms to mingle with mortals. In some versions of the tale, she emerges not from mist, but from a fragrant flower, or she descends with a retinue of fairy attendants. The core remains the same. She embodies purity, the mountains, and the fertile strength of the land. Historians still argue whether she represents a memory of upland tribal queens, women who held unusual authority in early Vietnamese societies, or whether she is purely a poetic invention. Either way, her story has endured for centuries because it speaks to the idea that beauty and leadership can be woven from the same cloth. You watch her walk barefoot on mossy stones, every step quiet, but somehow echoing. Her gown shimmers as if it's stitched from starlight and wildflower petals. You think, if she wore this to a modern wedding, she'd outshine the cake and half the decorations. But her beauty isn't fragile. It carries the strength of high cliffs and sharp mountain air. You can sense the sturdiness of granite under her grace, like someone who can smile gently while also telling you to pull weeds properly. The fairy maiden pauses near a waterfall, spray sparkling like diamonds in the sun. The sound is steady, calming, as though the mountain itself hums a lullaby. She closes her eyes, and you almost expect birds to land on her shoulders like in an old animated film. And yes, here comes the quirky tidbit. In some versions of Southeast Asian folklore, fairies weren't these delicate butterfly-winged creatures. They were closer to forest spirits, strong guardians of fertility, rain, and crops. If you insulted one, you risked a bad harvest. Basically, they were the Yelp reviewers of the ancient world. Make them unhappy, and your 5-star rice season dropped to 1. Ukko's aura is tied deeply to the land. While the Dragon King embodied the sea, she embodied the soil, the cliffs, the growth of plants. It's as though myth took the raw forces of nature, tides and stone, and gave them faces to make them less terrifying. After all, who wouldn't prefer to imagine a kind fairy instead of an avalanche, or a noble dragon king instead of a typhoon? You keep walking with her along a narrow trail where orchids dangle like lanterns. The air is warm, but laced with cool drafts tumbling from hidden caves. These caves, by the way, have a historical anchor. Northern Vietnam is riddled with limestone karsts full of stalactites and caverns where prehistoric communities left traces, stone tools, pottery shards, hearths. Archaeologists believe some of these caves sheltered the earliest farming villages. It's tempting to imagine that stories of Ukko began in these echoing spaces, her name whispered while smoke rose toward the dripping ceilings. She turns, and her eyes, clear, reflective, as though carrying entire skies, meet yours. You feel an odd calm, as though all your worries are pebbles she can sweep away with one smile. She kneels to touch the soil, and plants seem to lean closer. The legend insists she carried within her the power to nurture life itself. For a people whose survival depended on agriculture, a fairy of fertility wasn't just a nice bedtime story. It was a psychological safety net. If Ukko loved you, your rice would grow. If she frowned, well, better hope you enjoy plain boiled weeds. Historians still argue whether the worship of female fertility spirits in Vietnam connects to a larger Southeast Asian matriarchal tradition. Some point to evidence of women playing central roles in clan leadership. Others counter with skepticism, saying myths often elevate women symbolically, while real-world power remained patriarchal. The truth, like the mist curling around the ridges, is probably somewhere between. You watch as Ukko sings softly, a melody without words, more like the sound of wind through bamboo. And here comes a modern aside. If she released that track on Spotify today, people would label it forest core meditation beats and fall asleep instantly. Honestly, the fairy princess had the ASMR game mastered centuries before YouTube. At her feet, deer step cautiously from the undergrowth, drawn by her presence. She strokes their heads without fear. The entire forest seems to lean closer, vines thickening, flowers blooming wider. And you realize, if the Dragon King is raw, roaring strength, then the fairy princess is quiet endurance. He can summon storms, but she can make rice grow year after year. Together, they are balance. One quirky anecdote pops into your head. In some Vietnamese folktales, Ukko isn't just a passive beauty. She has fiery independence. Some versions describe her refusing suitors or leading her people herself before meeting the Dragon King. That detail often gets glossed over, but it suggests she wasn't merely a celestial accessory. She was leadership wrapped in silk and moonlight. The mountain path narrows until it opens onto a plateau. From here, you see layers of ridges stretching into haze, each one fading bluer into the distance. The silence is immense, broken only by the sigh of wind. Oko stands at the edge, hair drifting like banners. You can tell she belongs here, as much a part of the cliffs as the hawks circling above. And yet you sense something unfinished. Her gaze turns seaward, as though she feels a pull she cannot name. You know what's coming, even if she doesn't yet. The crossing of paths between land and sea, fairy and dragon. For now, she lingers at the edge, humming to herself, unaware that destiny is just beyond the next horizon. The mountains breathe around you. The air grows cooler and the fairy princess drifts away like a dream half remembered. You follow, knowing her path will eventually lead to the riverbank where another story begins. You step carefully down from the plateau where the fairy princess once stood, and now the sound of rushing water grows louder. The trail twists, roots clutching at your ankles, until you arrive at the riverbank. It's not a grand river like the Mekong, but a winding silver ribbon, sliding between boulders and reeds, carrying with it the hum of time. Here, at this meeting place of land and water, something extraordinary happens. You feel it before you see it, the weight of a story settling onto your shoulders, the kind that makes ordinary scenery shimmer. The river murmurs with voices. You imagine early villagers kneeling on its banks, washing vegetables, rinsing fishing nets, splashing children in the shallows. Rivers were life, veins through which communities pulsed. Historically, rivers in northern Vietnam were central to both travel and agriculture. Settlements clustered near them, not just for drinking water, but also for irrigation of rice fields. If you were going to invent a legend about two great ancestors meeting, a riverbank was the perfect stage. Practical and poetic, all at once. And here, through the mist rising off the current, the Dragon King and the fairy princess finally cross paths. You see him first, Lac Long Quan, stepping out from the water. His cloak is still damp, heavy with salt, and his eyes carry the glitter of 1,000 waves. Then she appears, Oko, drifting down the path from the highland forest, gown brushing ferns, hair still carrying the scent of mountain wind. For a moment, they simply regard one another. It's not the cliché of love at first sight. It's something deeper, like recognition. Two beings shaped by opposite realms, realizing they complete a circle. Historians still argue whether this meeting was meant to represent an actual merging of tribes, coastal seafarers intermarrying with highland farmers, or whether it was always just an allegory about balance. Some even suggest it encoded trade networks, fish from the coast, salt from the sea, exchanged for rice and herbs from the uplands. That's the thing about myths. They double as story and memory card. They hold more than they admit. The river flows lazily, as if to slow time for them. You watch as they step closer, their reflections trembling side by side in the water. You can almost hear the villagers gossiping. Did you hear? A dragon king from the sea has met the mountain fairy. Imagine their kids. And that's not far from how oral traditions worked. Big events, or even imagined ones, spread like ripples, each retelling adding another shimmer until the story glowed with myth. She kneels to touch the water, and for the first time, the river feels both mountain-born and ocean-bound. He crouches beside her, dipping his hand into the current. Their gestures mirror each other, two forces meeting halfway. It's quietly romantic, but also political if you squint. Imagine leaders of two tribes arranging a symbolic union and then explaining it to their people with grandeur. Yes, your chief married a fairy. No, you don't get a discount on taxes. The quirky tidbit here is that rivers in Vietnamese culture are often described as mothers. They birth the land, carry silt, nurture rice. So the fact that this great encounter happens by a river isn't random, it's layered. It's like the story is saying, even the earth itself approves of this union. Kind of like when your grandmother insists you bring your date over so she can judge them, except here the river plays grandma. You notice the way Oko laughs softly at something Lac Long Quan says. It isn't a human laugh exactly, more like the sound of a breeze teasing through bamboo chimes. And his response isn't a booming roar, but a ripple in the river that suddenly leaps like a fish. Myth never paints them as stiff or formal. They're oddly human in these little gestures. Which makes sense. No one wants bedtime stories about awkward, silent couples staring into the void. Historians still argue whether the myth might preserve traces of matrilineal customs, since many Southeast Asian societies once traced lineage through women. After all, it's Oko's miraculous childbirth that defines the legend, not the Dragon King's conquests. But then again, Lac Long Quan, slaying monsters, plays just as big a role in collective memory. So maybe the story is balanced like their meeting here. Half hers, half his, both halves inseparable. The riverbank around them comes alive. Birds swoop lower, dragonflies shimmer, the reeds sway as though bowing. It's the universe giving them a standing ovation. Or maybe it's just a monsoon breeze. You can never tell with legends. Either way, the scene radiates inevitability. You feel it in your chest. Of course they had to meet. Of course their union would explain a nation's birth. Humans crave stories that tie beginnings into neat knots, even if reality is a tangled mess. A quirky modern thought intrudes. You wonder what their first conversation was like. Did he lead with, "Hey, I control the tides"? Did she reply, "That's nice. I grow rice with my mind"? If so, that beats any pickup line in history. You almost pity everyone else in the dating pool. The sun dips lower, staining the river gold. Shadows stretch long, and you feel the quiet intensify. The Dragon King and the Fairy Maiden lean closer, speaking softly. But you can't hear the words. That's intentional. Some mysteries are meant to stay muffled, letting your imagination fill in the blanks. And as the sky bruises into twilight, the riverbank becomes more than just geography. It becomes a hinge in the story of a people. Two worlds meet here, land and sea, fairy and dragon, highland and coast. And even though you know what comes next, the marriage, the eggs, the children, you stay with this moment a little longer. Because beginnings are precious, and this one, wrapped in mist and gold light, deserves to linger. The river fades into memory, but the glow of that meeting lingers as you follow the couple deeper into the valley. The air here feels warmer, scented with wild ginger and damp stone, as if the earth itself is leaning in to watch. Lac Long Quan and Oko walk side by side now, neither rushing nor hesitating, their steps somehow synchronized, even though one is born of waves and the other of cliffs. You trail behind, like an eavesdropper on destiny, as they arrive in a secluded clearing where the grass grows soft and the mountains fold inward protectively, forming a cradle for what comes next. This is where love blossoms. And not the glittery, pop song kind of love. It's quieter, steadier, layered with respect. The Dragon King, despite his strength and power, listens when the fairy maiden speaks. She, despite her luminous grace, looks at him without fear, as though she can see beyond the scales and into the man who carries both storm and tenderness. You watch them share food, roots gathered from the hillside, fish pulled from the river. It's domestic, almost humble. And in that simplicity, their bond feels more real than any golden palace. Historians still argue whether this union symbolized a genuine merging of two cultural groups or was simply a narrative convenience. The coastal clans, adept at fishing and navigation, had reasons to mingle with highland tribes who cultivated rice and herbs. Was their marriage a coded story about political alliances? Or did storytellers just decide that a dragon and fairy pairing made for the most magical power couple in Southeast Asia? No one can say for sure, but the debate continues in scholarly articles that read suspiciously like gossip columns. You notice the valley's quiet details. Cicadas shriek like rusty hinges, the kind of background noise you stop noticing only after an hour. Fireflies blink in lazy patterns, little lanterns lighting their evening courtship. A stream threads through the grass, its water clear enough to see fish flicker like silver ribbons. Everything seems to lean toward the lovers as though nature itself is invested in their union. Honestly, even the rocks look smug, as if whispering, "Called it." Lac Long Quan shows her how to summon fresh water by digging into damp earth, his dragonborn strength shifting soil with ease. Ko responds by coaxing plants to sprout from seeds, with just a touch, her fairy essence accelerating growth. It's not just romance, it's collaboration. You think to yourself that if they opened a joint business, it would be unbeatable. Sea and soil, Inc., your one-stop shop for survival. The quirky tidbit that slips into your mind here is how ancient Vietnamese weddings were often celebrated not with glittery jewels, but with shared meals and symbolic gifts of food, rice, fish, fruits. That sense of nourishment and survival echoed the belief that unions weren't just about passion. They were about ensuring communities thrived. When the myth shows dragon and fairy exchanging gifts of sustenance, it mirrors that practice. And honestly, here, have a banana I magicked from thin air is way cooler than a diamond ring. As night folds over the valley, they light a fire. The flames crackle, painting their faces in orange warmth. You watch them laugh, gestures small, but full of ease. It's the kind of laughter you only share when you feel safe enough to look ridiculous. And in that flicker, you understand why storytellers chose to linger here. Before the eggs, before the children, before the great parting, there was this: two beings enjoying each other's company. Historians still argue whether their love story was intended as romance at all, or whether later retellings added the softer touches. Some suggest the original tale was more pragmatic, stripped of affection, simply declaring that they produced children. But oral storytelling has a habit of sneaking in embellishments, and if generations of villagers wanted to imagine their mythical parents as genuinely fond of each other, who can blame them? It's easier to believe you come from laughter than from awkward silence. You stretch out on the grass, eyes heavy, listening as the fire pops. The night deepens, stars scattered like spilled rice grains across the sky. Ko tilts her head back, gazing upward, while Lac Long Quan traces patterns with his finger in the air, explaining constellations. You catch fragments of his voice, deep and steady, as he links stars to ancient dragons and ocean spirits. She hums in reply, pointing out shapes that remind her of flowers and birds. The sky becomes their shared canvas, painted with both ocean and mountain stories. And then, gently, inevitably, they lean toward each other. It's not dramatic. No lightning bolts, no earthquakes. Just two beings, both halves of a greater whole, recognizing what every listener has known since they first laid eyes on each other. Their union seals not with a roar or a spell, but with silence. The kind of silence so deep that even the cicadas hush. Even the wind stills, as if giving them space. A quirky modern aside slips into your thoughts. You can't help but picture how their story would be staged in a movie. Slow motion gaze, swelling soundtrack, maybe a drone shot sweeping over the valley. But here, in the original version, the soundtrack is just fire crackle and river murmur, the cinematography handled by moonlight and fog. And honestly, that's way better. The valley itself seems to sigh with relief, as though it's been waiting millennia for this balance. Fairy and dragon, land and sea, strength and nurture. You lie there, feeling your own breath align with theirs, lulled by the rhythm of love that is both mythical and ordinary. Soon, this love will yield something extraordinary, an egg sac of 100 lives. But that's tomorrow's story. Tonight, the valley holds only warmth, laughter, and the quiet blossoming of affection that would ripple across a nation's history. For now, you let your eyelids grow heavy with the fire's glow and the fairy's song, knowing that beginnings always deserve a little rest before destiny arrives. The fire in the valley has long burned down to embers, yet the warmth of that night lingers as morning mists coil through the grass. You awaken, or maybe you never really slept, just in time to witness something extraordinary. Uko, the fairy princess, stirs with a look of wonder on her face, as though she carries a secret even the mountains don't yet know. Beside her, Lac Long Quan watches silently, his eyes full of calm certainty, because he already understands that the union of land and sea would never be ordinary. Days pass in a blur of soft winds and rippling streams until the moment arrives. Uko kneels in their hut, woven from bamboo and roofed with palm leaves, and instead of the cries of a newborn, there is the quiet, uncanny presence of an egg sac. Not one or two, but 100 gleaming eggs, clustered together like pearls, too large for any oyster. The room glows faintly as if lit from within, and you lean closer, heart thudding, because it is both miraculous and a little unnerving. Historians still argue about what this strange detail means. Some say the eggs represent clans or tribes, each child symbolizing a lineage that later merged into the Vietnamese people. Others insist the number is poetic exaggeration, a way of saying many descendants without writing down census data. And then there are those who point out that in Southeast Asian folklore, eggs often symbolize rebirth and continuity. But you, sitting there in the hush of dawn, simply marvel at the image. A fairy giving birth not to babies, but to the beginnings of a nation wrapped in shells. The hut fills with a faint, resin-sweet fragrance, like incense drifting in from unseen temples. The eggs pulse gently, warm against the straw. You imagine villagers whispering outside, exchanging gossip with wide eyes. Did you hear? The fairy gave birth to eggs. Eggs? Yes, Eggs. 100 of them. It must have sounded outrageous even then, yet myths thrive on the outrageous. Ordinary details fade in memory, but miracles stick. One quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. In certain Southeast Asian traditions, eggs were sometimes offered in rituals to ensure fertility or luck. The logic was simple. If an egg could hold the potential for life, then surely it could hold blessings too. So perhaps this legend didn't seem as bizarre to ancient ears as it does to us. Imagine telling a modern friend, "Guess what? I just laid 100 eggs," and watching them frantically Google whether that's a medical emergency. The Dragon King leans closer to the cluster, his scales flickering faintly across his arms as though resonating with the miracle. He touches one egg gently, his claw retracted to avoid harm, and the surface shimmers like moonlit water. Uko places her palm beside his, her fairy aura glowing faintly, and together they bless their brood. No words are needed. Their silence speaks more than 1,000 lullabies. The valley outside seems to know something monumental has happened. Birds circle overhead in slow arcs, as though reluctant to leave. The river murmurs louder, stones glistening as if freshly polished. The air hums with an invisible chorus, nature itself joining in the celebration. You lean back against the hut wall, half expecting confetti to rain from the heavens. Instead, there's only the rustle of leaves, which is much more eco-friendly. Historians still argue whether this episode symbolizes a deliberate mythological parallel to other egg birth stories found across Asia. In China, certain cultures told of cosmic eggs birthing the universe. In India, the golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, was the origin of creation. The Vietnamese legend seems to echo this motif while making it local, grounding cosmic beginnings in the intimacy of a family. It's not a world egg, it's 100 national eggs, personal enough to matter to villagers gathered around smoky fires. You crouch closer, fascinated. The eggs don't hatch right away. They rest, glowing faintly, as if absorbing strength from earth and sea both. Weeks pass, the couple tending them with the patience of gardeners. Each morning, Uko sprinkles dew from mountain leaves over them, and each evening, Lac Long Quan fans them with waves of cool sea breeze summoned from afar. You can't help but smirk at the domesticity of it all. Two divine beings basically running a daycare for oversized eggs. And then, one dawn, cracks appear. Tiny at first, hairline fractures like spiderwebs, spreading across each shell. The air trembles with anticipation. You lean so close you can almost feel the warmth radiating from them. A sharp crack breaks the silence, then another, until the hut is filled with the sound of hatching. One by one, the eggs burst open, revealing children. Healthy, loud, wriggling with life. 50 boys, 50 girls, each one radiant with a spark of the extraordinary. Their cries harmonize into something that feels less like chaos and more like a choir announcing their arrival. The parents gather them, holding each with equal care. Dragon arms and fairy hands rocking them gently. No child is neglected. No egg wasted. The legend insists that all 100 survived, a miraculous birth rate that would put modern hospitals out of business. It's as though destiny itself refused to let any thread of the future unravel. You marvel at the sheer logistics. 100 children? Imagine family dinners, the noise, the squabbles, the endless requests for snacks. Even divine parents must have sighed occasionally. And yet, myths gloss over the tantrums and diapers, preferring to paint the picture of harmony. Perhaps that's the trick of storytelling, smoothing over the rough edges so that future listeners drift peacefully to sleep. The quirky modern thought sneaks in. If this happened today, there'd be reality TV crews swarming the valley. Welcome to Dragon Fairy Family Values. Tonight's episode, sibling rivalry at the 100-child dinner table. But here, in the hush of ancient myth, there are no cameras, only stars peeking down curiously. You sit back, watching the children stretch, yawn, and blink at the world. Each one carries hints of both parents, some with glimmers of scales on their skin that fade as they grow, others with faint auras that shimmer like mist. They are not half dragons or half fairies exactly. They are something new, a bridge between two realms. Their existence explains how humans can belong to both mountain and sea, how Vietnam itself can claim ancestry that is both rugged and fluid, fierce and nurturing. As the sun rises higher, the family spills out into the valley. Children run across grass, tumbling and laughing, their voices echoing through the hills. Ko smiles, her face soft with pride. Lac Long Quan watches with arms crossed, trying to look stern, but unable to hide his grin. For a moment, the valley becomes the happiest place in the world, and you, weary traveler, let the sound of their laughter wash over you, carrying you into a drowsy calm. Because whether you take it as literal truth or symbolic myth, there is something soothing about imagining 100 children born from love and miracle, their existence weaving together the threads of a nation's beginning. The 100 eggs have cracked, the 100 children have stepped into daylight, and now you trail behind them as they spill across the valley like a tide of laughter. Their tiny feet press into the earth, leaving imprints that might never fade, at least not in memory. You notice how quickly they learn, how easily they adapt. One moment they're wobbling, the next they're sprinting up hills, climbing trees, splashing into rivers as if the world itself is their playground. You can't help but think of the modern parenting panic, imagining 100 toddlers running in all directions. You'd probably install fences, trackers, and maybe a few caffeine IVs for yourself. But here, the dragon father and fairy mother watch calmly, knowing these children are not ordinary mortals. Each child carries some trace of their origins. Some laugh with voices that ripple like waves, each note echoing with the rhythm of the sea. Others sit still, gazing at mountains with eyes that shine like dew on stone. A few tumble in the mud with endless energy, reminding you of actual human children, except with slightly more sparkle in their aura. As you follow them, you realize this is not just a family picnic. It is a living metaphor for a nation's geography. Vietnam itself, split between mountain highlands and endless coastlines, finds its spirit reflected in these children. Historians still argue whether this legend was meant to map geography onto genealogy. Was the tale invented to explain why some tribes lived inland while others thrived by the ocean? Or was it a political story, a way for rulers to unify disparate clans under one mythical ancestry? The debates continue in books and lecture halls, but as you stand here watching the kids wrestle in the grass, you see it less as propaganda and more as survival storytelling. People needed to understand themselves, and sometimes the simplest way was to claim one set of parents. A quirky tidbit pops into your head. Ancient Vietnamese communities often saw themselves as descended from specific animal spirits or guardian deities. Villages could boast of a totem creature, like a turtle, bird, or fish, that linked them to divine origins. So, the idea of dragon fairy kids wasn't outlandish. It was an upscale upgrade. Instead of being children of, say, a carp spirit, you get to be the child of both a mighty dragon and an elegant fairy. Prestige level, unlocked. The children scatter through the valley, each drawn instinctively to their element. You follow one boy who runs toward the river, dipping his hands into the water. Instantly, small fish leap as though summoned, their silver scales flashing like coins in the sun. He laughs, and the water responds with ripples that shape themselves into delicate patterns. Another child, a girl with hair dark as midnight, climbs a tree so quickly she could give modern parkour athletes an inferiority complex. From her perch, she calls down to her siblings, her voice steady like a breeze rustling leaves. As the days stretch into weeks, the valley transforms into something between a village and a schoolyard. The children invent games that reflect their dual heritage. Races where half the group sprints across land while the others swim downriver. Contests to see who can build the tallest stone cairn or catch the brightest fish. You imagine them as prototypes of mountain tribes and seafaring clans, already rehearsing the roles they would someday play in shaping history. Lac Long Quan and Auko watch, guiding gently. He teaches them to respect the tides, to harness the strength of the waves without being swallowed by them. She shows them how to honor the soil, to grow rice from mud, to weave harmony between human hands and stubborn earth. And you notice, these lessons aren't just practical skills. They are seeds of culture, quietly planted in children who will scatter to create something larger than themselves. Historians still argue whether these teachings reflect real agricultural and maritime traditions of early Vietnam. Did the myth retroactively embed rice farming and fishing into its origin story to give them divine authority? Or were the practices already there, simply mythologized later? You smile, because debates aside, the result is clear. People believed their daily bread and fish came with a celestial stamp of approval. One evening, you join the children gathered around a fire. Sparks rise into the night sky as they listen to their parents' stories. U Ko tells of mountain spirits who guard springs, while Lac Long Quan recounts battles against sea monsters lurking offshore. The children gasp, giggle, and interrupt with endless questions, proof that even semi-divine kids behave like human ones when stories are involved. You lean against a rock, letting their chatter lull you, until you almost forget the sheer improbability of 100 siblings coexisting without tearing each other apart. Of course, not everything is perfect harmony. Now and then, small quarrels break out. One boy claims the river belongs to his group. Another insists the mountain peak should be theirs. A little tug of war with sticks escalates into a splash fight that leaves half the children drenched. And you think, yes, this is realistic. Families squabble, even legendary ones. But here's the twist. Instead of growing bitter, the children turn their conflicts into traditions. The fight over the riverbank becomes an annual game, and who owns the mountain evolves into a climbing contest. In this way, competition feeds community rather than division. Honestly, you wish modern politics worked the same way. Settle disagreements with splash fights and climbing races. A quirky historical connection flickers in your memory. In early Vietnamese villages, festivals often included mock battles or contests, symbolic struggles that reinforced unity. Maybe the legend of the dragon and fairy children served the same purpose, showing that disputes are natural but can be ritualized into something constructive. The children grow stronger, taller. Their laughter carries further across the valley. You notice how they instinctively form smaller groups, each exploring different directions, some toward the sea, others toward the forests, still others toward the mountains. It's like watching seedlings prepare to scatter in the wind. You realize this stage of the legend is transitional. The family is whole now, but soon it won't be. Separation lingers just beyond the horizon, and you can almost hear the faint cracking of destiny's knuckles, warming up for the next move. Yet, for the moment, you linger in the peace. The valley glows under starlight, the fire crackles, and the 100 children hum lullabies they've made up themselves. Their voices rise like mist, threading through night air. Some melodies sound like waves. Others echo like mountain wind. Together, they weave a harmony that could rock you to sleep if you let it. And maybe that's the point. Legends don't just explain origins. They soothe restless minds, convincing you that even chaos can be sung into order. You close your eyes, the sound of dragon fairy children's songs circling you, and you know you've just witnessed the mythic childhood of a nation. The valley has become a living chorus of footsteps, laughter, and songs, yet beneath the cheerful noise you begin to sense a shift, like an undertone in a melody that darkens without warning. The 100 children, once content to chase fish and climb trees together, now seem tugged in different directions. You notice how some of them keep staring longingly at the horizon where the sea glitters under the sun, while others fix their gaze on the misty mountains rising in the distance. The dragon father and the fairy mother see it too, and though they keep smiling, there is a weight in their eyes, a shadow of realization. Lac Long Quan stands near the river, his gaze fixed on the rushing water. He belongs to the sea, the waves, the endless expanse that stretches toward the horizon. The ocean is not just his home, it is his essence, his heartbeat. Oko, by contrast, feels her strength in the soil beneath her feet, in the rocky slopes that guard springs, in the peaks that scrape the sky. She breathes mountain air the way he breathes salt wind. And though love brought them together, the pull of their origins begins to gnaw at them like waves against stone. You feel the tension whenever they speak in hushed tones at night. The children need the mountains, she says. The sea will call them, he replies. Neither is wrong, and that's what makes it harder. It's the kind of disagreement where you realize compromise might not exist, like arguing whether water or air is more essential. You literally need both. Historians still argue whether this moment in the legend reflects genuine cultural divisions. Was it meant to explain why Vietnamese society developed both inland agricultural groups and coastal fishing communities? Or was it more symbolic, a way of saying that identity itself is made of contradiction, forever pulled between two poles? The debate lingers, much like the quiet arguments between dragon and fairy in the soft dark of the valley. The children sense it too. Around the fire, they split into two clusters, those who chatter about seashells, tides, and journeys on boats, and those who speak of caves, forests, and rice terraces carved into hillsides. It isn't hostility, not yet. It's just preference. But you know how preference can grow into division if left unchecked. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some parts of ancient Vietnam, villages would compete fiercely in boat races, while others staged mock battles on hillsides. These weren't just games, they were rituals of identity, rehearsals of belonging. Maybe the seeds of those traditions are already sprouting here in the myth. One evening, you sit with the children by the river. A boy with eyes like storm clouds points at the waves and says, "That's where I'm meant to be. I feel it." His sister beside him shakes her head and presses a handful of soil into her palm. "No," she says softly. "Our home is here, where the land is strong." The others nod in agreement, some to him, some to her, until the group is split. You imagine yourself trying to referee this debate, maybe pulling out a whiteboard to diagram pros and cons like a tired modern teacher. But here, no diagrams can solve it. The pull of blood and spirit is too strong. The parents call everyone together under the stars. The air is heavy, as though nature itself holds its breath. Oko speaks first, her voice steady, though her eyes shimmer with sadness. "Children," she says, "you are one, born from the same love, but your hearts lean toward different paths. I cannot keep you all in the mountains, for some of you belong to the waves." Lac Long Quan places his hand on her shoulder and continues, "Nor can I carry you all into the sea, for some of you would wither without the soil beneath your feet." You can feel the silence afterward, broken only by the crackling fire. The 100 children glance at each other, torn between loyalty and longing. For the first time, they understand that even miracle-born siblings must sometimes choose different lives. Historians still argue whether this division reflects historical migrations, the movement of tribes from highlands to lowlands, from river deltas to coastal villages. Some scholars suggest the legend encodes memory of cultural fission, when early Vietnamese people diversified across different terrains. Others claim it's simply a story to explain why families spread out. Either way, the myth captures something universal, the ache of separation. The quirky part, of course, is how neatly the number divides. 50 for mountains, 50 for sea. Reality, you know, is never that symmetrical. Imagine trying to split 100 kids today. Okay, 50 of you love surfing, 50 of you love hiking. Perfect balance, no arguments. In real life, you'd end up with 48 mountain enthusiasts, 51 ocean fanatics, and one indecisive kid who just wants to play video games indoors. But the myth isn't about messy reality. It's about symmetry, balance, and the strange comfort of neat numbers. The days that follow are bittersweet. You wander with the children as they explore their chosen paths, practicing skills for futures they don't fully understand. Those leaning toward the sea learn to weave nets from reeds, their fingers quick and sure. They practice balancing on logs that float down the river, pretending they are boats. Those leaning toward the mountains gather herbs, carve tools from stone, and plant seedlings in patches of soil. Both groups thrive, yet the valley feels emptier, stretched thin by invisible lines. At night, the parents sit apart, staring into the distance. Uko hums a lullaby to the children near her, soft as mist. Lac Long Quan whispers to those by the river, his words echoing like tides. You can't help but think, this is the story of every family that grows too large, of every community that must someday split to survive. Love alone is not always enough to keep people together. You follow one child, neither the strongest nor the loudest, just one of the 100, who wanders between groups, unsure where to belong. Sometimes they sit by the river, listening to the waves. Other times they climb the hills, breathing mountain air. They remind you of the timeless human struggle to bridge two worlds, to be both, and yet not entirely either. That child, you suspect, is the stand-in for all of Vietnam, a nation forever balancing sea and mountain, never fully choosing one over the other. And so, under the heavy silence of a starlit sky, the family begins to drift apart in spirit, before they ever part in body. The eggs that once glowed in unison have now hatched into 100 hearts tugged by different winds. And you, drowsy listener, sit with the ache of it, knowing that the next step is inevitable. The great parting, when laughter will echo in separate valleys and waves will sing to only half the children. The fire in the valley has dimmed to glowing coals, and the songs of the 100 children sound thinner now, divided into 2 melodies instead of one. You walk slowly among them, feeling the air heavy with inevitability. The dragon father and fairy mother exchange glances across the flickering light, and in their silence you can read everything. Love still burns between them, but love alone cannot untangle the pull of their origins. The time for the great parting has arrived. One morning, the parents call their children together beneath the tallest tree in the valley. Its branches stretch high into the sky. Its roots dig deep into the soil, fitting, you think, for a moment that will anchor itself in memory. Lac Long Quan speaks first, his voice low and steady like waves brushing shore. "Children," he says, "you were born of miracle, of dragon and fairy both. But each of you feels the call of your element, and to deny that call would be to deny yourselves." His words roll across the group, firm yet gentle, like a father preparing his children for a journey they don't fully understand. U Ko steps forward, her robe flowing like mist. "My beloved children," she whispers, "half of you belong to the mountains, and half to the sea. This is not a division of love. It is a sharing of destiny. Each path is sacred." Her voice quivers slightly, but she holds steady, because a mother must sometimes speak strength, even when her heart trembles. The children look around at one another, their eyes wide. Some lean toward the sea-born siblings, others toward those who love the highlands. The idea of separation unsettles them, yet deep down, they know it is true. You see it in their restless glances toward horizon and hilltop, like birds caged too long. Historians still argue whether this part of the legend encodes a real historical split. Did the tale emerge to explain the dispersal of early Vietnamese clans, some venturing inland to farm rice terraces, while others stayed near rivers and coasts to fish and trade? Or is it purely symbolic, a mythic way to reconcile cultural duality, sea and land, mobility and rootedness? No one agrees fully, which seems fitting for a story about division. The parents divide their brood with deliberate symmetry. 50 children follow Lac Long Quan toward the sea. 50 remain with U Ko among the mountains. The balance is almost too perfect, like a math problem solved with suspicious ease. And yet, that neatness is precisely what makes it mythic. Comfort in round numbers, a reassurance that even separation can be orderly. You can't help but smirk, though, thinking of real families. Try splitting siblings evenly today. and you'll have 3 complaining it's unfair, 2 negotiating trade deals, and 1 sulking in the corner. But in the legend, nobody sulks. The symmetry holds. Before they leave, there is ceremony. Lac Long Quan gathers the sea-bound children by the riverbank. He dips his hands into the current, splashing each forehead with water. This tide will carry you, but do not let it sweep you away. Use its strength, not its fury. The children nod solemnly, though a few sneak grins at the splash, as if already turning ritual into play. Meanwhile, Oko leads the mountain-bound children to the foot of a rocky hill. She presses soil into each of their palms. This earth will hold you, but do not cling so tightly that you cannot grow. Let your roots deepen, but let your branches stretch. The children cup the soil carefully, their faces lit by the morning sun. Half reverence, half curiosity. The farewell between dragon and fairy is quiet, too quiet for such a momentous break. They stand together, hands clasped, as if to memorize the warmth of each other's presence. No dramatic speeches, just the heavy silence of 2 beings who know they cannot walk the same road, but still carry the same love. You shift uncomfortably, because it feels intrusive to witness such raw tenderness. But that is the gift of myth. It lets you see heartbreak dressed in poetry. Historians still argue whether this separation reflects more than geography. Some suggest it symbolizes political duality, the tension between central authority and local autonomy, between unity and fragmentation that has marked Vietnamese history for centuries. Others argue it's a universal allegory, a way of saying that every people is born from both longing and loss. And as you listen to the debates echo faintly in your mind, you realize myths endure precisely because they resist single explanations. A quirky tidbit flutters up. In some Vietnamese folk festivals, communities still stage mock farewells, reenacting separations before joyfully reuniting. Perhaps those rituals echo this mythic parting, replaying ancient heartbreak with the reassurance of eventual return. Humans, it seems, never tire of dramatizing the ache of goodbye. The children themselves handle it better than you expect. They hug, they laugh, they promise to visit, though you wonder what visit means when half of them will live beneath tides and the other half atop cliffs. Still, their resilience shines. They are children of miracle after all. Separation cannot extinguish the spark in their eyes. And so, the departure begins. Lac Long Quan strides toward the river, his 50 trailing behind like a silver-scaled procession. The water parts slightly, welcoming them, and soon the horizon swallows their figures. Oko turns with her 50, leading them up the slopes where mist curls like banners. Her silhouette fades into the tree line, and you are left standing in the valley, now achingly empty. The silence is startling. Where once there was a cacophony of laughter, now there is only the murmur of river and rustle of leaves. You breathe deeply, letting the quiet settle, realizing you have just witnessed a nation split at birth. And though the myth assures you both groups remain kin, the ache of division clings to the air, refusing to disperse. You lie back in the grass, staring at the sky. Above, clouds drift lazily, some shaped like waves, others like mountains, as if even the heavens can't decide which path to favor. You let your eyes close, lulled by the thought that maybe, just maybe, every separation contains within it the seed of reunion. The valley where the 100 children once laughed together lies quiet now, and you follow your thoughts outward, tracing the paths of both groups. 50 march with their father toward the coastlines, 50 climb with their mother into the misty mountains. You sense that this is not just the end of a family gathering. It is the beginning of something far larger. Each child, whether carrying soil in their palm or salt spray on their cheeks, will become a seed of a nation. You picture the sea-bound children first. They follow Lac Long Quan into the embrace of the ocean, their toes sinking into wet sand as waves curl around their ankles. Some take to boats fashioned from hollowed logs, others dive into the surf as naturally as breathing. Their laughter mingles with the cries of gulls, their hair plastered with salt. Soon they learn to weave nets, to fish with sharpened spears, to ride the rhythm of tides. Villages sprout along rivers and coasts, houses on stilts rising above marshes and deltas. These children will one day shape the maritime soul of Vietnam. Traders, sailors, guardians of the shore. Meanwhile, you climb with Oko and her children into the hills. The air thins, cool and fragrant with pine and soil. They clear patches of land, planting rice in terraces that hug the slopes like stairways for giants. They carve tools from stone, tame streams into irrigation channels, and build homes of bamboo that sway gently in mountain winds. They learn the language of the earth, the patience of crops, the secrets of herbs, the rhythm of seasonal cycles. From them will come the upland clans, rooted in valleys, protective of springs, deeply tied to the soil. Historians still argue whether this myth actually reflects the dual development of Vietnamese civilization. Some tribes oriented to the sea, others to agriculture in the highlands. Archaeologists point to evidence: coastal settlements with fish hooks and boat remains, inland communities with rice paddies and bronze tools. Was the story a poetic way of explaining these two lifestyles as children of the same parents? The debate continues, as debates always do, because scholars can't resist turning bedtime stories into academic turf wars. A quirky tidbit, you recall: the Jungan culture, flourishing around 600 BCE, produced those famous bronze drums, decorated with both ships and farming scenes. It's almost as if the drums themselves wanted to confirm the legend, mountain and sea, both inscribed on metal to be remembered. Imagine ancient musicians pounding rhythms on drums so loud they carried across valleys, uniting clans in sound even when geography kept them apart. It feels like a soundtrack written for this myth. The children grow into leaders. One becomes a chieftain who guides his people through mangrove swamps, teaching them to navigate by stars reflected in dark water. Another becomes a healer in the mountains, her knowledge of herbs so deep she can quiet fevers with a single leaf. Each child embodies a fragment of their parents' heritage, and through them, Vietnam itself begins to take shape. Not as a single tribe, but as a constellation of communities bound by kinship. You trail along as seasons pass. In the highlands, festivals bloom with rice harvests, drums beating, dancers circling fires. In the deltas, boats painted with bright eyes slide through waterways during ceremonies, carrying offerings to river spirits. Different landscapes, different rituals, yet you can't miss the echoes. The same joy, the same hunger for belonging, the same bloodline threading them together. It's like watching a family album unfold in multiple locations at once. Historians still argue whether the 100 children were ever meant literally, or whether the number simply marked a collective origin. Perhaps each child symbolized a clan, a tribe, or even a village, making the myth less about individuals and more about group identity. In that sense, Vietnam could proudly say, "We were born not from conquest or accident, but from family." And really, isn't that a much warmer bedtime story than one about endless wars? But don't get too cozy. Real history is messier. Archaeological layers reveal rivalries, migrations, even conflicts. Yet the legend smooths these rough edges into one harmonious tale, giving later generations something unifying to cling to. It's a bit like editing your Instagram feed. You crop out the awkward photos and leave only the golden hour glow. A quirky modern thought sneaks in. Imagine if all nations had such a neat myth of origin. Instead of saying, "Our ancestors fought for centuries, wiped each other out, then grudgingly merged," you'd simply say, "Oh yes, our forefathers were 100 magical siblings from dragon and fairy parents." It beats explaining tax records and intertribal feuds. Still, beneath the myth's polish, you sense its truth, unity through diversity. Whether by sea or by soil, whether cast in nets or planting seeds, the children's legacy lies not in sameness, but in shared origin. And that idea, more than any spear or plow, would give resilience to the people who came after. As night falls on your wandering, you hear echoes of the sibling songs, carried by wind from both directions. Ocean waves humming a low lullaby, mountain winds whistling a high counterpoint. Together, they form a harmony that is neither fully one nor the other. You close your eyes, drifting in the sound, knowing that this is the heartbeat of a nation. Many voices, one family. The night lingers, and you find yourself drawn not to the gentle waves or the rice terraces this time, but to the booming echo of bronze. Somewhere in the distance, you hear it, steady, resonant, like thunder shaped by human hands. You follow the sound until you arrive at a clearing where villagers gather around enormous bronze drums. Their surfaces gleam in firelight, decorated with patterns that swirl like rivers, spiral like stars, and march in rows like soldiers frozen in time. These are the Jungan drums, relics of an age when myth began to tangle with archaeology. You step closer, running your eyes across the carvings. Ships glide across the bronze face, their prows carved with exaggerated eyes, as though the boats themselves can see into the mist. Around them, figures dance with feathered headdresses, brandishing spears, playing flutes, moving in rhythm with the pounding beats. In another scene, farmers bend over rice paddies, their bodies etched with patient strokes. One drum holds it all: sea, land, war, feast, like the entire legend of the dragon and fairies' children hammered into metal for eternity. Historians still argue whether these drums were ceremonial instruments, calendars, or even symbols of power carried from one tribe to another. Some believe the sound was so loud it could communicate across valleys, summoning warriors or announcing harvest rituals. Others insist they were more like trophies, displayed by elites to show off wealth and influence. The truth? Probably a mix of everything. That's the beauty of ancient artifacts. They refuse to give you one simple answer, because where's the fun in that? A quirky tidbit slips in. These drums were so valued that they traveled far beyond Vietnam. Archaeologists have unearthed them in Indonesia, Malaysia, and southern China. It's like the Bronze Age version of viral TikToks. Once one community started pounding out rhythms, everybody wanted a copy. Except instead of 15-second clips of dancing cats, You got 100-kilo drums that required entire villages to craft. Talk about trending. You settle into the scene. Villagers gather around the drum, children wide-eyed, elders solemn. A man raises a stick wrapped in leather and strikes the bronze. The sound is deep, rich, reverberating through your chest like a second heartbeat. It's not just noise, it's a message, a binding force. You imagine the siblings of dragon and fairy blood hearing these same sounds, scattered across mountains and seas, reminded that they belonged to something bigger than themselves. The rhythm continues, and with it comes stories. You listen as an elder chants of ancestors who came from eggs, who split but never severed. He reminds the young ones that every harvest, every boat launched, every battle fought echoes those first 100 siblings. The drums are not just instruments, they are time machines, keeping memory alive when words might falter. Historians still argue whether the designs on the drums are literal depictions of real life or stylized visions of ritual. Do the carved warriors represent actual battles, or were they mythic reenactments meant to honor divine ancestry? Was that ship a regular fishing boat, or a ceremonial vessel no ordinary villager ever saw? You lean toward the latter. People rarely etch mundane chores into bronze unless those chores meant more than survival. The quirky thought pops up. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, a craftsman hunched over molten bronze, muttering because someone smudged the pattern while it was still cooling. Maybe he cursed his apprentice for spilling charcoal, the way modern editors sigh when autocorrect changes ancestor into alligator. And yet, his creation survives millennia, while most of our emails will vanish the moment we forget a password. Perspective, right? As you keep listening, the drums begin to weave a story with the land itself. The booming sound rolls through rice fields, making stalks tremble as though bowing in rhythm. It bounces off mountainsides, echoing back with doubled force. Even the sea seems to respond, waves crashing in sync. It's as though the instruments remind the world itself that the children of dragon and fairy are present, still dancing, still thriving. Later dynasties would treasure these drums too. Kings collected them, buried them with honor, even repurposed them for rituals centuries after their makers had vanished. To hold a Jungan drum was to hold authority, as if you tapped directly into that original myth. And when foreign empires came sniffing around, they were baffled. Why would these people carry such heavy objects through forests and rivers? Because you think, some weight isn't a burden, it's identity. You lean back, letting the sound vibrate you into drowsiness. The boom is steady, hypnotic. You can almost see the 100 siblings gathered again, half by the sea, half in the mountains, all swaying to the same beat. The drum doesn't care about geography. It doesn't care about politics. It cares only about memory and rhythm. And if you let it, it lulls you into a calm where time blurs and history feels less like a textbook and more like a lullaby. You rise at dawn, and the mist curls low over the paddies. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, and you find yourself walking barefoot into a field where water laps at your ankles. Rows of young rice shoots sway gently, their green tips catching the pale morning light. Around you, villagers bend low, their conical hats bobbing like floating lotus leaves. The rhythm of their work is so precise it feels like choreography. Bend, plant, step, repeat. This is no ordinary farm chore. It is ritual, ancient and sacred, blurring the line between necessity and devotion. You notice offerings placed at the field's edge, a clay bowl filled with rice wine, a few drops of blood from a freshly sacrificed chicken, and incense smoke curling into the sky. These acts aren't just superstition. They are a dialogue between people and the land, a whispered plea to the spirits of soil and water. Please, let the harvest be kind. And in your mind, you can hear the echoes of the 100 siblings, each one weaving their own way of surviving, yet tied together by the same elemental relationship, human and earth, forever negotiating. Historians still argue whether such rituals came purely from indigenous belief or whether they were shaped by influences from neighboring regions like China or India. Some suggest the idea of rice as a sacred crop spread through cultural exchanges along trade routes. Others argue that the earliest Vietnamese already venerated rice long before outsiders arrived, simply because life demanded it. Either way, the rituals stuck, layer upon layer, until the very act of planting became inseparable from prayer. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some villages, farmers used to blow on snail shells before planting, believing the sound would call rain. Imagine dozens of adults standing ankle-deep in water, puffing into shells like off-key trumpeters, trying to summon clouds. It might look silly, but when your entire survival hinges on rainfall, even snail shell jazz feels worth a try. And honestly, it beats checking a weather app that never seems right anyway. You linger by the paddies, listening to the clop of water buffalo hooves. Children chase frogs along the dikes, their laughter ringing across the valley. Women carry baskets balanced on poles, the loads swaying like pendulums. Men adjust irrigation channels with bamboo tools, redirecting streams with practiced precision. The scene is so alive, yet so routine, that you realize you are witnessing not just farming, but a cultural heartbeat. Without rice, there is no village. Without rituals, there is no meaning. The cycle continues into festivals. After harvest, communities gather to thank both earth and ancestors. You see lanterns drifting down rivers, carrying tiny flames that bob like stars on water. You hear drums again. Yes, the same bronze echoes of the Jungan heritage, this time accompanied by chanting, gongs, and the splash of dancers moving through shallow streams. It is half religious, half party, and entirely a reminder that the harvest belongs to everyone, not just the individual who planted the seed. Historians still argue whether these festivals reinforced social hierarchy or flattened it. Some claim that communal rituals allowed elites to display wealth by sponsoring feasts, while others suggest the gatherings leveled differences, letting all villagers share equally in the bounty. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Humans are remarkably skilled at both celebrating together and quietly competing over who brought the best sticky rice cakes. The quirky detail you can't shake. In certain regions, people once smeared mud on each other during planting festivals, believing it blessed fertility. It probably also guaranteed a lot of ruined clothes and some awkward laundry conversations. Yet the symbolism was clear. Just as the earth must be wet and fertile for crops, so too must humans embrace messiness if they want life to grow. A strangely profound lesson hiding under layers of sludge. You wander further, noticing shrines tucked into field corners. Small, humble altars hold statues of local spirits, sometimes a dragon coiled protectively. sometimes a fairy figure with wings spread wide. These shrines remind you of the myth, linking the everyday act of rice cultivation back to the dragon father and fairy mother. The land itself becomes an altar, each rice stalk a prayer answered. In this way, history, myth, and survival weave into one inseparable braid. The sun climbs higher, and the fields shimmer like mirrors. Farmers sing as they work, their songs slow, repetitive, almost like lullabies. The melodies drift on the breeze, carrying stories of ancestors who tilled these same fields, invoking blessings for children not yet born. You realize this isn't just about food, it's about continuity. Every planted seed says, "We were here, we are here, we will be here." And as you stand in the water, the mud between your toes cooling your skin, you can almost feel the myth breathe again. You remember the 100 eggs, the 100 siblings, the split between mountains and sea. Yet here, in the paddies, the story reconnects. Whether highland terrace or coastal plain, all lives bend toward rice. And in every stalk, you sense the legacy of those first children, learning to live between dragon's salt and fairy's soil. The night deepens, and you find yourself guided not by drums or rice shoots this time, but by the flicker of campfires. Smoke curls lazily into the air, carrying with it the scent of roasted tubers and charred fish. You sit down among villagers gathered in a circle, their faces glowing red from the flames. The firelight seems to carve wrinkles into deeper lines, turning every elder into a storyteller etched by centuries. And here, for the first time, you hear whispers of the Hung Kings, those semi-mythic rulers who carried the blood of dragon and fairy children into dynastic memory. The elder begins with a voice that is steady, almost hypnotic. Long ago, after the children of Oko and Lac Long Quan spread across mountains and seas, the eldest among them became the first Hung King. The listeners murmur softly, nodding as though they've heard this 1,000 times, yet still hunger for it. The tale unfurls slowly. 18 generations of Hung Kings ruling the land called Vun Lang, overseeing rice fields, rivers, and forests, keeping alive the lineage of the 100 siblings. Historians still argue whether the Hung Kings were real rulers or symbolic figures stitched together by later dynasties. Some point to relics unearthed in Pu Tho province, stone tools, bronze artifacts, as evidence of organized leadership. Others caution that archaeology can tell you people lived and farmed there, but not that they crowned kings. The debate loops endlessly, like an academic campfire story of its own. But for the villagers around you tonight, the kings are not abstract. They are ancestors. You picture the Hung court, not as a marble palace, but as wooden halls perched on hills, open to the wind. Chiefs gather there clad in bark fiber cloth, bronze spears at their sides. Rituals fill the air, sacrifices to mountain gods, invocations to river spirits, dances echoing the old rhythms of Jong-san drums. Governance in this age is less about decrees written on parchment and more about who can guide a community through flood or famine. Authority grows not from signatures, but from survival. A quirky tidbit pops into the tale. One of the most famous Hung King legends involves a cooking contest. The king, seeking a worthy successor, asked his sons to bring him the most delicious food. While many presented exotic dishes, one son offered simple ban chung, square rice cake, and ban day, round rice cake, symbolizing earth and sky. The king chose him, declaring that wisdom lay not in extravagance, but in honoring the essentials of life. You can almost imagine the siblings of dragon and fairy laughing at the contest. Our dynasty's throne decided by snacks? Sounds about right. The elder's voice dips, describing how the Hung kings defended their people against invaders. Wooden palisades rose around villages, warriors smeared with ash prepared for battle, and shamans called upon the dragon father for strength. In these stories, myth and fact blur together. Did real wars unfold, or were they memory turned into legend? You lean closer to the fire, soot tickling your nose, wondering if truth even matters. For those gathered, the stories are truth enough. Historians still argue whether Van Lang truly unified under a single lineage or was simply a patchwork of tribes loosely bound by kinship. Some scholars suspect the Hung kings were retroactively invented to give Vietnam an ancient royal pedigree, a way of saying, we had kings too, long before foreign dynasties claimed dominance. Whether invention or reality, the legend shaped identity more deeply than any artifact could. The fire crackles, sparks spiraling into the night. Children lean against their mother's laps, drifting towards sleep as the elder continues. He speaks of sacred sites like Ngia Lin Mountain, where the kings are said to have worshipped the ancestors. Even today, he says, pilgrims climb that mountain during festivals, carrying incense and prayers. The past isn't gone. It's rehearsed annually, keeping the line between history and myth deliciously blurred. Another quirky tidbit. In some later periods, local officials petitioned to include the Hung kings in imperial ancestor worship, elevating them alongside more official dynasties. Imagine bureaucrats filing paperwork to honor semi-mythical rulers, stamping documents as if to say, yes, these legendary egg-born siblings meet all requirements for state-sanctioned reverence. It shows you that even bureaucracy sometimes bends to bedtime stories. You close your eyes and hear the cadence of the elder's words, blending with the fire's hiss. The Hung kings are no longer distant figures. They sit beside you, ghostly yet warm, their presence stitched into every detail of village life. The rice cakes steaming in bamboo, the bronze drums rumbling in festivals, the shrines hidden in groves. You realize that the children of dragon and fairy did not merely scatter and vanish. They gathered again, symbolically, under dynasties that claimed their bloodline. The flames die down, leaving only glowing embers. The elder finishes softly. The kings are gone, but we remember, and by remembering, we keep them alive. His words float into the night, joining smoke and stars, wrapping around you like a blanket. You sit back, drowsy, feeling that the myth has deepened once more, carrying you from eggs to kings, from siblings to rulers. The story lingers, and with it, a gentle sense of belonging that stretches across centuries. You sit in the shadow of a stone citadel, its walls weathered by centuries of rain and moss. The air hums faintly with cicadas, but the silence of history presses heavier than the insect chorus. Here, among broken gates and ancient pillars, you realize how myths are not just bedtime tales. They are political tools, sharpened and wielded like bronze swords. This is the age when rulers began to turn the dragon and fairy legend into something more, a mandate for authority. You watch a ruler ascend a wooden platform, banners rippling overhead. He speaks with confidence, his voice carrying across the crowd. I am descended from Lac Long Quan, the dragon of the sea. The villagers nod, some with awe, others with skepticism. But whether or not they believe, the story binds them. If the king's blood is divine, obedience feels less like submission to a man and more like reverence for the cosmos. It's a neat trick. Religion, mythology, and politics rolled into one. Historians still argue whether such claims were sincerely believed or strategically fabricated. Did rulers truly see themselves as children of the dragon, or did they know it was convenient propaganda? Some scholars point to temple inscriptions where dynasties like the Li and Tran proudly traced their lineages back to the mythical pair. Others suspect these were retroactive inventions, like writing your family tree backward until you eventually bump into a deity. Either way, the effect was real. People rallied behind leaders who claimed to be cousins of dragons. A quirky tidbit brightens the scene. During the Li dynasty, officials sometimes staged elaborate parades featuring giant papier-mâché dragons winding through the streets, breathing fire with hidden bellows. It was equal parts spectacle and sermon, reminding spectators that the state itself carried the dragon's blessing. Imagine sitting in the crowd, eating roasted chestnuts, watching a dragon puppet flop around and thinking, "Yep, that's why my taxes are so high." You wander into a temple built to honor both ancestors and mythical figures. Its incense-thick air makes your eyes sting, but the carvings on the altars capture your attention. Dragons coil around pillars, their scales meticulously painted while fairies hover above, wings spread wide. The symbolism is unmistakable. By kneeling here, you aren't just praying to spirits, you're acknowledging the ruler's sacred genealogy. The fire of politics burns hottest during invasions. Rulers call upon the legend not only to govern, but also to defend. When northern armies press across the border, proclamations ring out. Remember, we are the children of dragon and fairy. This land is our mother's gift, our father's bloodline. Defend it as you would defend your family. The myth, once a gentle bedtime story, becomes a war drum, its rhythm compelling men and women alike to pick up spears. Historians still argue whether this strategy was manipulative or genuinely inspirational. Was the legend a top-down invention imposed by elites, or a grassroots story embraced by villagers long before kings claimed it? The scholarly squabbles continue, but for you, walking through these ruined citadels, the answer feels irrelevant. Whether trick or truth, the legend worked. Armies marched, communities resisted, and nations survived. Another quirky fact slips in. In medieval chronicles, some rulers recorded dreams in which dragons appeared, wrapping around their thrones or swimming through palace ponds. These dreams were dutifully written down by court historians as evidence of divine favor. You can almost picture a bleary-eyed king mumbling, "I dreamt of a dragon last night," and a scribe furiously scribbling, "Yes, sire, most excellent proof of your divine mandate. Try telling that to your boss today. I deserve a promotion because I dreamt about a sea serpent." Good luck. The manipulation of myth wasn't limited to the throne. Local lords, too, claimed dragon fairy descent, competing for legitimacy. Some built shrines in their villages, claiming, "Our branch of the family was especially favored." Others insisted their rivers, hills, or even rocks were blessed by the siblings' footsteps. It created a strange political landscape where everyone was technically related, yet no one wanted to sit at the same dinner table. You trace your hand along cracked stone walls, imagining banners flying above them centuries ago. The cries of hawkers in market squares, the chants of monks, the shouts of soldiers, all carried the same undertone. We are chosen. It must have been comforting, especially in turbulent times, to believe that chaos was temporary, because divine ancestry guaranteed endurance. Historians still argue whether the continuity of Vietnamese identity owes more to myths or to sheer resilience of geography and culture. Perhaps both. Myths gave shape to endurance, and endurance gave life to myths. Like rice shoots in water, fragile alone, unshakable together. Night thickens around you. You hear faint echoes of a court musician plucking a John bow, the single-string zither humming with melancholic sweetness. The notes stretch like threads, binding memory to myth. You realize that the dragon and fairy story is no longer just a lullaby. It is a throne, a shield, and a contract written not in ink, but in belief. You close your eyes, feeling the hum of the instrument fade into the hum of cicadas. The kings may be gone, their citadels in ruins, but their mandate lingers in every dragon carving, every festival, every whispered prayer. And as you lean back against the stone, lulled by the weight of centuries, you sense how myths, once whispered by firelight, became laws carved into stone. You drift now into narrower streets, their stones slick with rain and lanterns swaying in the damp breeze. The scent is different here, less of incense and rice fields, more of smoke and unfamiliar spices. Foreign footsteps echo in the alleys, boots heavier than the soft sandals of villagers. You've walked into a time when colonial shadows creep across the land, and the legend of the dragon and fairy is no longer just a local treasure. It becomes something studied, catalogued, even twisted by empires eager to control not only bodies, but also imaginations. You watch as French scholars sit beneath high ceilings, their tables cluttered with manuscripts, ink pots, and half-empty glasses of wine. They jot down translations of Vietnamese folktales, including the dragon fairy story, with the brisk precision of outsiders dissecting butterflies. Some write glowing accounts, marveling at the poetry of a nation birthed from myth. Others dismiss it as childish fable, proof, at least in their minds, that Vietnam lacked serious history before colonial records arrived. You roll your eyes because you know better. History doesn't need validation from people who can't even pronounce ko without stumbling. Historians still argue whether colonial administrators used the legend deliberately as a tool of soft control. Some suggest they encouraged its retelling in sanitized forms, emphasizing unity under myth, while suppressing versions that carried rebellious undertones. Others believe they feared its power too much, trying instead to downplay it as superstition. Either way, the presence of the legend in colonial archives shows it mattered, even when stripped of context. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some colonial-era schoolbooks included a simplified version of the dragon fairy story, illustrated with cartoonish sketches. In these, the dragon looks suspiciously like a French crocodile, and the fairy resembles a European ballerina in a tutu. Imagine being a Vietnamese child reading that and thinking, why does our ancestor look like a zoo animal and a Parisian dancer fell into the wrong book? The mismatch is both laughable and insulting. You walk further, hearing whispers in cafes where intellectuals gather, their voices low but urgent. They sip thick coffee, chain-smoke cigarettes, and argue about how to reclaim the legend. To them, the dragon and fairy are not quaint bedtime tales. They are proof of a people's endurance, older than colonial borders, deeper than imported ideologies. Some write essays weaving the myth into calls for resistance, hinting that just as the siblings divided to survive, so too must their descendants endure occupation without losing kinship. At the same time, missionaries preach in chapels, dismissing local stories as pagan relics. Yet even as they condemn them, they cannot erase them. Villagers still gather at shrines, whispering prayers to dragon and fairy figures, even as church bells toll in the distance. The legend becomes an act of quiet defiance, believing in ancestors the colonizers cannot baptize away. Historians still argue whether colonialism permanently altered how Vietnamese people viewed their myths. Did the dragon fairy legend grow stronger as resistance symbol or weaker under foreign scrutiny? Some claim colonial rewriting fractured the story, creating multiple versions that competed for legitimacy. Others suggest the myth simply absorbed the pressure, like bamboo bending under storm winds, only to stand upright again once the storm passed. You turn a corner and find a theater lit by dim oil lamps. Inside, performers in silk robes reenact the parting of Lac Long Quan and O Ko. Their movements are slow, graceful, almost mournful. The audience watches in silence, the separation of the parents echoing the separation of land from freedom. You feel the weight of allegory pressing down, a family divided, a nation divided, both longing for reunion. The play ends with the children scattering, and for a moment you hear sniffles in the dark. Quiet tears, disguised as appreciation for art, but really for the unspoken wish of unity. A quirky observation: colonial officers often attended such plays, jotting notes, sometimes clapping politely without realizing the audience around them was weeping for something far deeper. It's like laughing at a joke in a language you don't understand, thinking it's about chickens crossing roads, when in fact, it's about your host quietly insulting you. You notice, too, how artists adapt the myth to evade censorship. Painters depict dragons coiled not only around mountains, but also around chains, fairies with wings stretched as though breaking free from cages. The legend morphs into metaphor, its imagery sharpened like a hidden blade. Even when words are banned, pictures slip through, carrying messages colonizers fail to decode. Night presses thicker now, the rain falling harder, and you realize that myths survive not because they are harmless, but because they are dangerous to those who try to control them. The dragon and fairy children cannot be neatly filed into colonial archives. They live in rice fields, in songs, in whispered prayers, in theater, in art, and most of all, in memory. You step back into the alley, lantern light flickering against puddles. Behind you, voices rise again in a cafe, earnest, defiant, hopeful. Ahead, somewhere unseen, drums echo faintly, as if reminding you that bronze beats outlast foreign boots. You walk on, knowing that even in the shadows of empire, the legend flickers unextinguished, waiting for the right moment to blaze again. The air changes again as you step out from those rain-slick colonial alleys into a brighter, noisier street. This time, you're no longer under the heavy boots of empire, but standing in a Vietnam that begins to dream of independence. Radios crackle in the distance, the hum of printing presses echoes from hidden basements, and banners ripple faintly in the night breeze. The dragon and fairy legend doesn't vanish. It mutates, threading itself into slogans, songs, and secret speeches. You notice how a story once told beside rice paddies now surfaces in revolutionary pamphlets, urging people to see themselves as one vast family that has been unfairly separated, yet destined to reunite. Mainstream fact slides in here. In the 20th century, nationalist movements across Vietnam often turned to folklore and legend to rally support. Leaders and intellectuals recognized that history books written under colonial oversight lacked emotional power, while myths reached straight into the heart. The dragon and fairy children became symbolic, shorthand for unity, resilience, and the stubborn idea that Vietnam belonged to its people, not outsiders. A quirky tidbit. Some underground presses even printed little comic-style retellings of the dragon fairy story, complete with speech bubbles where Lac Long Quan literally says, "Take 50 with you," like some ancient action hero dad. Kids devoured these booklets, giggling at the drawings but absorbing the deeper message anyway. You can imagine a tired revolutionary hiding in the mountains, tucking one of those comics into his jacket pocket as a talisman. Historians still argue whether the legend's use in propaganda genuinely unified the nation or merely served as a convenient tool. Did people truly feel connected because of the shared myth, or was it just another slogan, repeated until it lost its meaning? Some scholars insist the story was too malleable, too easily twisted by whoever needed it. Others argue its endurance proves it carried a truth deeper than politics, a truth that even when bent, never broke. You walk past a mural painted hurriedly on a brick wall. At first glance, it's just a dragon coiling skyward, but look closer. Hidden within its scales are tiny faces, hundreds of them, representing the children of U Ko. The fairy floats above, wings wide, her gaze firm, almost protective. It's graffiti with teeth, a reminder that even forbidden walls can carry ancestry. Someone risked their freedom to paint it, and you sense they weren't thinking about fame. They were thinking about kinship. The streets grow louder. You pass a rally, voices chanting, hands waving flags stitched quickly in secret. And there, woven into speeches, you catch the refrain. "We are the children of the dragon, the grandchildren of the fairy." The crowd roars, not because it's a bedtime tale, but because it feels like a claim on destiny. They may not have guns as big or armies as organized, but they have a lineage that whispers, "You come from greatness." A quirky scene plays out beside you. A small boy, probably no older than 7, tries to shout the slogan but gets it wrong, blurting out something like, "We are the grandchildren of the dragon fruit." Everyone nearby bursts into laughter, tension broken for a moment. Even revolutions need comic relief, and maybe that slip-up sticks in memory longer than the polished speeches. Historians still argue whether this mythologizing of national identity was more empowering or dangerous. Some point out that framing a people as one mythical family glosses over real divisions, class, region, religion, that sometimes tore Vietnam apart. Others counter that, without such a unifying narrative, the fractures would have been worse. The debate itself proves the legend wasn't just a bedtime story anymore. It had grown teeth sharp enough to bite into politics. The soundscape shifts as you wander farther. Somewhere, a hidden classroom buzzes. Students huddle close around a teacher, whispering lines from the old legend as if reciting scripture. You notice the way their faces light up when they imagine themselves as descendants of heroes rather than subjects of empire. The chalk squeaks across the board, sketching a dragon and fairy, less like mythical parents and more like guardians leaning over their shoulders. The room feels fragile, yet fierce, as though every whispered word is a seed of rebellion. A quirky footnote lingers in your thoughts. During this time, some teachers secretly encoded parts of the dragon fairy story into math problems. Imagine being asked, if 50 children go with their mother to the mountains and 50 with their father to the sea, how many are there in total? The kids would smirk, because the answer wasn't just 100, it was also us. Learning disguised as legend, legend disguised as learning. You step into a dim courtyard where elders gather. They speak in low tones, their hands weaving through the air as they recall the legend, not from books, but from memory. One of them chuckles and adds embellishments. The dragon's scales shimmered like bronze drums. The fairy's breath smelled faintly of jasmine. They don't seem worried about factual precision. They're keeping the story alive. And as their voices fade into the dark, you realize the myth itself is an act of endurance, like passing down a candle in a storm. Historians still argue whether those candle-like retellings mattered more than the grand political speeches. Some insist revolutions are fueled by logistics, guns, supplies, alliances. Others counter that without the emotional spark of myth, the logistics never ignite. You lean toward the latter, because in this world, even a misquoted slogan or a comic book panel can carry the weight of centuries. You walk on. The night smells of wet earth and smoke, the kind that lingers after small fires burn paper offerings. The sound of a drum thumps faintly somewhere in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. You remember earlier echoes of bronze and realize, from caves to courts, from colonial alleys to revolutionary streets, the beat has never stopped. The dragon and fairy might be ancient, but their children walk beside you still, shouting, laughing, studying, resisting. You wander now into another shift of atmosphere, one less frantic than the rallies and hidden classrooms, but still thick with energy. It is the mid-20th century, the years when war scars the land more than rain ever could. Fires burn in villages, not just for cooking, but because bombs have fallen. Families scatter, sometimes north, sometimes south, echoing that ancient split of dragon and fairy children. You can almost hear the myth pulsing in the background, each side trying to claim it, each insisting they are the rightful heirs of the story. Mainstream historical fact fits here. During the long decades of conflict in Vietnam, from the First Indochina War through the Vietnam War, folklore and legend were heavily mobilized. Political leaders and cultural departments published versions of tales that aligned with their agendas. The dragon fairy origin became a banner for both unity and legitimacy, depending on who was retelling it. On radio programs, you might hear voices reciting the myth slowly, as though reciting scripture, linking modern fighters to ancient ancestors. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some wartime propaganda posters featured dragons breathing not fire, but stylized clouds that suspiciously resembled jet contrails. And in a few cases, the fairy was drawn handing rice balls to soldiers, as though she'd stepped out of myth and into a jungle camp kitchen. It was equal parts surreal and moving, like watching your grandmother turn up in a Marvel movie cameo, just long enough to wink before vanishing again. Historians still argue whether this heavy use of myth during war strengthened or diluted its power. Some argue the constant politicization made the legend feel hollow, like a slogan stamped on every pamphlet. Others suggest that in dark times, repetition was a kind of survival, hearing again and again that you were the child of a dragon and fairy reminded you of dignity when everything else stripped it away. You step through a battered village where houses lean like tired shoulders. A grandmother stirs porridge in a dented pot, and around her knees sit children listening. She doesn't speak of soldiers or politics. She simply tells them the old story, how Lac Long Quan and O Ko loved, then parted, and how their children spread across mountains and seas. The children lean closer, eyes wide, forgetting hunger for a moment. You realize then that the legend survives not because of posters or radio waves, but because one tired grandmother refuses to let silence replace memory. Elsewhere, in a jungle clearing, young fighters crouch with rifles. The rain drips heavy from leaves, and one soldier quietly hums a tune. You listen carefully. It is a lullaby, one that mentions the fairy's wings as blankets of comfort. His comrades chuckle, teasing him for singing about fairies before battle, but none truly laugh. The melody lingers, softening the harsh edge of war. It is a reminder that even armed with weapons, they are still children of a myth older than guns. A quirky moment. In some bases, soldiers carved dragons into the butts of their rifles. Not very practical. It probably annoyed the quartermasters, but it gave them a sense that their weapons carried ancestry. Some even joked the carvings would breathe fire if aimed properly. Superstition, sure, but in times when every step might be your last, superstition feels like armor. Historians still argue whether the legend played any role in reconciliation after the war. Did it provide common ground for people on both sides, reminding them they were all siblings, even if divided? Or did its repeated use in propaganda tie it too closely to division, making it harder to reclaim? The debate has no easy answer because myths are slippery. They can heal or harm, depending on how you hold them. You pass through a ruined temple, its roof half collapsed, incense sticks still smoldering in the damp air. Someone has painted on a cracked wall the image of U Ko, her face serene despite the rubble. At her feet, instead of neat children, there are blurred figures, faces without features, perhaps representing the countless lost to war. You stand before it quietly, realizing art can say what words cannot, that even in grief, the mother still stands, watching, waiting. Later, you find yourself at a makeshift campfire where a group of refugees gathers. The smoke rises thin, their bowls nearly empty, yet conversation stirs. One man tells the story again, but this time he adds his own line. The children scattered, yes, but the mountain and sea always meet again in the river. His listeners nod, eyes misty, clinging to the possibility of reunion. You feel the power of improvisation. The myth isn't frozen. It breathes with each retelling, reshaped by the needs of the moment. Another quirky anecdote. Some war reporters from abroad, trying to understand Vietnamese resilience, wrote about the dragon fairy story as if it were a political manifesto. One journalist even misinterpreted the separation of the parents as early evidence of communist versus capitalist division. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity. Imagine explaining to your ancestors that their marital split was apparently foreshadowing geopolitics. You walk on through smoky fields, fireflies flickering above the rice paddies. Their glow seems fragile, yet stubborn, like tiny embers refusing to die. You remember that the legend has always had this same quality, fragile enough to vanish under neglect, stubborn enough to survive centuries of conquest and war, and here, in the middle of 20th century chaos, it flickers just as persistently, reminding all who listen that they are not orphans of history, but children of an ancient union. The night air grows cooler, the stars dimmer under haze, but the beat of drums echoes faintly again. You realize now that whether in temples or trenches, villages or cities, the rhythm has never stopped. The legend may bend, may be twisted by propaganda or heavy hands, but it does not snap. It survives because people keep whispering it, retelling it, singing it, because people need it. And as you move further down the dark road, you carry the story with you, like a torch that refuses to go out. The country breathes differently now, and you sense it immediately. Cities hum with motorbikes and markets. Rivers carry cargo instead of only rituals. The old and the new collide in colors and sounds that can make your head spin. Yet the legend of the dragon and fairy continues to ripple through this landscape, quieter but no less potent. It is no longer confined to oral storytelling, propaganda, or clandestine classrooms. It has entered textbooks, songs, and even television programs, a familiar presence in the pulse of everyday life. You wander through a university library where students crowd around worn volumes, eyes scanning illustrations of dragons coiled around mountains, fairies hovering over rice paddies. Mainstream historical fact emerges. Post-1975 Vietnam began formalizing national identity in part by emphasizing cultural heritage. Folklore, including the myth of O Co and Lac Long Quan, was promoted as a unifying origin story. Schools taught the legend alongside geography and history, ensuring that every child grew up with the knowledge that they descended from a mythical lineage. Yet it was not merely nostalgic. It served as a reminder that survival, resilience, and community had been central to the nation for millennia. A quirky tidbit. Some modern students draw the dragon and fairy with sneakers, headphones, or smartphones, blending tradition with contemporary life. One comic depicted the siblings riding scooters through rice fields, arguing over GPS directions. The images are playful, yet the symbolism is clear. The story is still alive, evolving to remain relevant. You chuckle as you imagine ancient spirits trying to understand Instagram notifications and Wi-Fi signals. Historians still argue whether formalizing myths in education changes their meaning. Does teaching children that they are descendants of dragons and fairies reinforce cultural cohesion? Or does it risk sanitizing the story, turning it into a mere factoid devoid of the awe and mystery that gave it power? Some insist that once myths are printed, their spontaneity disappears. Others argue that knowledge keeps them from fading. You realize it's a delicate balance between preservation and ossification. Walking outside, you find a street performer balancing on a pole, a painted dragon coiled at his feet. He gestures to a small crowd and recites a condensed version of the legend. 50 went to the mountains, 50 to the sea, yet all belong to the same family. Children repeat it, mimicking his movements. the rhythm of words echoing through narrow alleys. You realize that performance, more than any classroom lesson, carries the emotional core of the story. The legend's heartbeat survives in gesture, in laughter, in shared experience. Meanwhile, artists and musicians reinterpret the myth in countless ways. A folk singer strums a John Bao, weaving the story into modern ballads. A painter splashes acrylic dragons across canvas, fairies hovering in neon pink and turquoise, bridging past and present. Even filmmakers adapt the tale, sometimes as a literal historical fantasy, sometimes as a metaphor for contemporary struggles, unity, family, identity. You watch one short film where the fairy's egg hatches in a city apartment, and the siblings scatter into subway tunnels and riverways. Somehow, it still feels faithful to the myth. Historians still argue whether commercial adaptations dilute or amplify cultural significance. Some lament that dragons in animated commercials or children's books risk trivializing a sacred narrative. Others suggest that every retelling, even in pop culture, ensures the myth is not forgotten. You lean toward the latter. Survival in a rapidly changing world requires flexibility. You walk along the banks of a river at dusk, water glinting orange and gold. Canoes drift lazily, children playing along the edges, their laughter reflecting the same joy as the first 100 siblings centuries ago. Shrines sit quietly on small embankments, incense smoke curling into twilight. You notice small offerings, coins, flowers, rice cakes, left not by elders teaching history, but by ordinary people keeping tradition alive. The act is intimate, spontaneous, persistent. A quirky detail. Some locals leave tiny origami dragons in plastic bottles as floating offerings, a practice combining playfulness with devotion. The paper dragons bob downstream, small witnesses to human continuity. You watch them drift past, imagining them carrying messages between mountains and sea, echoing the division and reunion of the first siblings. Historians still argue whether these modern practices retain the spiritual essence of the myth or simply function as cultural artifacts. The debate itself demonstrates the myth's endurance. It is always alive, constantly being reassessed, reshaped, and renewed. Night settles softly over the river. Lanterns reflected in water seem to float like stars fallen to earth. You walk slowly, absorbing the rhythm of life that blends ancient myth and modern reality. Somewhere, a distant drum echoes faintly, and for a moment, the lineage of the 100 siblings feels immediate, tangible. Mountains, rivers, cities, villages, all are woven together by ancestry, myth, and memory. And in that gentle weave, you feel the story carrying forward, not as a relic, but as a living, breathing force that reminds all who listen, you belong. The morning rises slowly, gold spilling across rooftops and rice paddies, illuminating everything with a softness that almost hurts your eyes. You follow narrow paths where motorbikes hum past, street vendors shout their wares, and children carry bundles of firewood or satchels. Even here, in the buzz of modern life, the story of the dragon and fairy children seeps quietly into daily existence. You notice it in the murals on walls, the names of streets, the songs that vendors hum between transactions. The myth is not grandiose or hidden. It has integrated seamlessly, a subtle pulse beneath the modern rhythm of the country. You pause at a schoolyard where students play under the watchful eyes of teachers. One teacher begins telling the story aloud, and children immediately fall silent, absorbed. They mimic the gestures of the fairy stretching her wings, or the dragon splashing into the sea, each movement a bridge between imagination and identity. Mainstream historical fact intertwines with play. Educators have long recognized that mythology can foster both cultural literacy and emotional intelligence, offering lessons in resilience, kinship, and respect for nature. A quirky tidbit. In some classrooms, students reenact the tale using recycled materials: bamboo for boats, paper for wings, and plastic bottles for mountains. It's chaotic, colorful, and inevitably messy, but the creativity reflects a modern way to inhabit the legend. Even when improvised, the symbolism persists. The mountains and seas, the siblings, the split and the shared roots, all remain vital threads in their understanding of belonging. Historians still argue whether these adaptations maintain the myth's original moral and spiritual power, or if they merely provide entertainment. Some argue that as societies modernize, legends inevitably evolve into storytime diversions. Others counter that myths are inherently adaptable. Their endurance depends on being retold, reshaped, and experienced by each new generation. You sense that adaptability is a sign of vitality rather than decay. The legend surfaces in festivals, too. You walk through a rural village preparing for Tet celebrations. Lanterns hang in trees, painted dragons coil along pathways, and performers rehearse dances echoing the rhythms of the Jongson drums. The community moves as a single organism, bound by centuries of story and shared memory. The fairy's wings are represented by flowing silks, the dragon's scales by sequined costumes. In this ritual, history, myth, and culture are inseparable. You wander to the banks of a wide river, reflecting lantern lights and the fading sunset. Children toss small paper boats into the current, carrying miniature offerings, while elders chant quietly, invoking blessings. The river itself seems alive with memory, a metaphorical conduit linking mountain children to sea children, past to present. You feel the legend in your chest, pulsing softly but insistently, a heartbeat carried through centuries. A quirky modern twist. City neighborhoods sometimes host dragon and fairy-themed flash mobs, where dancers in LED-lit costumes spin, leap, and perform interpretive movements to a mix of traditional instruments and electronic beats. It's a vivid reminder that myth can travel from pagodas to street corners, from incense-filled temples to neon-lit urban jungles. Even in high-tech chaos, the story retains its essence. Historians still argue whether commercialization of the legend erodes authenticity. Some insist that using dragons and fairies in advertisements or entertainment trivializes heritage. Others counter that any engagement, even playful or commercial, keeps the myth alive, ensuring that it remains part of collective consciousness. In your observation, survival matters more than purity. You pause to consider the hundreds of ways the story has been experienced, whispered beside rice fields, proclaimed from temple steps, painted on classroom walls, reenacted in theater, sung in radio dramas, and even broadcast on modern television. Each instance reinforces the continuity of culture. Each retelling is a gentle echo of the first 100 siblings, scattered yet enduring, shaping generations in ways that transcend time and technology. Finally, the night settles over the city and countryside alike, stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. The dragon and fairy children, the ancestors, the myth and the people, all coexist now in a rhythm that is simultaneously ancient and immediate. You realize that the story has not merely survived, it has thrived, adapting to every circumstance, whispering its truths to anyone willing to listen. The pulse of mythology continues, steady, comforting, and unbroken. You linger now at the edge of another horizon, where the land of legend meets the realities of a restless world. Cities glow with neon, villages hum with radios and smartphones, and airplanes cross the skies like silver-scaled dragons of metal. You realize the story of Lac Long Quan and Ko has not stopped at national borders. It travels with people, carried in luggage and lullabies, whispered in kitchens from Paris to California, from Sydney to Toronto. The dragon fairy children are no longer only in the mountains or seas of Vietnam. They scatter across continents, searching for home in unfamiliar skies. Mainstream historical fact settles in here. Over 4 million people of Vietnamese heritage now live outside of Vietnam, forming a widespread diaspora. Many of them keep ancestral stories alive as a way of staying connected to roots. Among those stories, the dragon fairy legend holds a privileged place, often retold to children who may never have walked rice paddies, but still feel the tug of belonging. The myth becomes a lifeline across oceans. A quirky tidbit drifts into memory. In some Vietnamese restaurants abroad, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, the menus included a little blurb about the origin myth, sandwiched between faux descriptions and spring roll prices. Imagine flipping open a laminated menu in Houston and suddenly being told you are related to a dragon and a fairy before you even order your banh xeo. Somehow, that casual placement gave the legend a new role, both appetizer and ancestry. Historians still argue whether myths survive better inside the homeland or in diaspora. Some suggest distance sharpens memory, making traditions feel sacred when they are fragile abroad. Others believe only in the homeland can a myth breathe fully, tied to rivers and mountains that birthed it. The truth, you sense, lies somewhere in between. Myths adapt, whether nourished by temple incense or restaurant chatter. You stroll through a bustling little Saigon market overseas. Stalls overflow with herbs, sticky rice, and chatter. Above one bakery, a mural of a dragon and fairy floats across the wall, painted in bright acrylics. Locals walk past it daily, some barely glancing, others pausing just long enough to smile. It's not a grand shrine or a political slogan. It's simply presence, a reassurance that the past lingers even here, thousands of miles away from the Red River Delta. Elsewhere, in university lecture halls, young Vietnamese students abroad debate their identity. They flip between English and Vietnamese, joking, arguing, and sometimes confessing they feel torn, like the 100 siblings divided between mountain and sea. A professor points out the myth as an allegory of diaspora, a reminder that separation doesn't erase kinship. You nod quietly, realizing the legend was always about this, being apart, yet still one family. A quirky scene you witness. During a Tet festival in Berlin, kids dressed as dragons in shiny sequined costumes run around too fast, bumping into bratwurst stands and confusing German bystanders. One little girl, playing Ko, loses her cardboard wings, and instead of crying, she tapes them back with neon duct tape. It's both clumsy and profound, proof that the story survives not in perfection, but in persistence. Historians still argue whether myths are truly timeless, or whether they gradually transform into metaphors, unrecognizable from their original form. Some worry that dragons in neon duct tape stray too far from ancient reverence. Others laugh and say, reverence without joy is a coffin, not a cradle. The children's laughter, duct-taped wings and all, feels like the stronger argument. As you continue wandering, the myth grows softer in tone, less about battles or politics, and more about quiet identity. It becomes a bedtime story again, this time told in apartment bedrooms with glow-in-the-dark stickers on the ceiling. A mother whispers the tale in Vietnamese, then explains in English, so her child understands both. You come from mountains and seas, she says, tucking the blanket. The child drifts off, comforted by the idea of belonging to something bigger than homework and cartoons. You step outside, feeling the cool air of a global night. The myth stretches across oceans, across time zones, binding people who may never meet, but still share the same ancestral heartbeat. Whether in Saigon or San Jose, in Hanoi or Hamburg, the children of the dragon and fairy still breathe, dream, argue, laugh, and build lives. And as you watch city lights flicker like stars, you realize the legend has come full circle. From egg to empire, from war to diaspora, it has flowed through every stage of history like a river that refuses to dry. The children may be scattered more widely than ever, but the bond remains unbroken, humming under the noise of daily life, steady as a drumbeat that will never fade. So now, with the tale stretched all the way from misty mountains to neon-lit cities, you finally let yourself slow down. Your breath softens, your shoulders sink a little deeper into the pillow, and the glow of the story fades like lanterns floating downstream. The dragon and fairy have walked beside you for a long while tonight, but even they must rest, curling back into silence, leaving you with only the rhythm of your own heartbeat. You imagine the sea, calm now, not stormy or dramatic, just endless and steady. Waves roll in and out like the sound of breathing, patient and unhurried. Somewhere beyond, mountains rise in the distance, their peaks blurred by a silver mist. Between them stretches a gentle valley where the 100 children once lived. And in that quiet, you feel both halves of the world join, mountain and sea, memory and dream, past and present. Your mind no longer needs to chase the details of kings, temples, or debates. Instead, it drifts like a feather caught on a slow breeze. Each thought feels softer, wider, less urgent. Even the jokes and asides, the quirky facts about crocodile dung sunscreen or duct-taped fairy wings seem far away, faint echoes that only make you smile before dissolving into the hush. The night air cools around you. A fan hums softly, steady as the waves you just imagined. Your eyelids grow heavy, heavier still, until they are almost closed. The story has carried you far enough. Now you don't need words at all, only rest. So let go. Let the dragon curl beneath the sea, let the fairy rest on her cloud, and let yourself sink, slowly, gently, into the deepest part of sleep. Sweet dreams.